Why are they so expensive yet so crappy?
I have no idea. I know nothing about them. Never worked on one, don't know anything about them.
Because they're labeled as high-end vehicles and they're just regular sports cars.
They are, and they break down all the time, so I don't
They're
understand.
pieces of shit.
Yeah, so I don't
Maseratis
understand.
are turbo cars.
What cars?
Maseratis. No, only thing cool about them is they got that, what's that, the little, what's that thing called? The logo. Oh yeah, Aston Martins are nice. The only thing cool about the Maserati is the symbol they have. That's it.
Oh. Okay, where were we an hour and a half ago? We were somewhere in here.
Drive pinion gear depth, I think, I don't know.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Differential
I don't
assembly.
have it, so I can't.
So, on this one here, it's showing you the differential case. This is what they call the case, not the housing. The housing is actually the structural part, the metal, like an engine block would be, right? So this is what they call the differential case. You can see the ring and pinion gear, ring gear here with your side gears. So these bearings, again, tapered roller bearings. This part here is the race. That's what the bearing rides on. I showed you this before. This is a bearing race. This is what the actual bearing rides on, okay? These don't fit, obviously. This would be a perfect fit if it was right for it. Okay? That's what you're seeing here. Okay? And this pinion gear, this is where those shims would go in order to set the depth. Okay, you would put a little metal shim right here, then put it in the housing, check the depth once the ring gear carrier's in there. And again, preload, because it's a tapered roller bearing, right? Some of them have these little adjusters to adjust the preload. It's just how tight are you gonna get that? You gotta get it just right, okay? A lot to it. You may never overhaul a differential in your life, but again, informational and helpful, hopefully, if you ever do it, okay? Your actual bearings, those are typically ball bearings. If the ball bearings are used, the bearing itself absorbs the radial forces. There's no axle shaft or end play or thrust adjustment. Straight roller bearings, same thing as that, just straight, no taper. They don't have the, right? They're just a straight roller bearing. A lot of axle bearings are straight roller bearings. On that one, the axle surface serves as the inner race. So the axle actually rides on the bearing itself. There is no race, okay? Bearing is being lubricated by your differential lubricant. There's no axle shaft end plate adjustment with this design. It's got a tapered roller bearing in the rear axle. The bearing is pre-lubricated before it's installed and it's held in by a press fit on the axle shaft. Axle shaft end plate is adjustable on that type. This is one that would have a tapered roller bearing. Again, the bearing rides on the axle itself, right? The bearing's actually inside the differential housing here. You would just pull the axle out to replace this axle seal or the bearing. This is the axle seal here. Keeps the fluid from getting onto the brakes. Anybody familiar with drum brakes? This is a drum brake system. You ever seen one of those? Are you familiar with them at all? Yeah. They're not, you don't see them much anymore, but they're still out there.
They're on trucks usually.
Bigger trucks, yeah, they'll have a lot of them, but, so you're only gonna see this on the rear,
Yeah.
okay, never on the front.
Yeah, that's why I was always wondering, like, why doesn't that really have like a brake?
Most cars have four-wheel disc brakes, but some of them, on smaller cars, some of them will have rear drums still. But for the most part, they've gotten away from drum brakes. But that's what this is. You can see the brake shoes here, and then there's a drum that goes over there, but yeah, that's actual drum brake system. And there you go, there's your axle bearing after they pull the axle out of it. It's a straight roller bearing. You got a seal right here, keeps the differential fluid from leaking out. because that differential fluid is what lubricates those bearings too. Identification, we don't have to worry about that. Okay, pinion gear thrust washers can be destroyed by spinning one wheel for an extended period of time. Your girl in the movie didn't mention that, did she?
Huh, I'm sorry, what?
Your girl in the movie didn't mention that, did she?
Mention what, love?
Spinning one wheel in the mud for too long.
I was reading, I'm sorry, I missed it, the pinion gear thrust washers. Oh, yeah, no, she didn't, no. Leave her alone.
Leave her alone. All right. If you wanted to determine the axle ratio on a rear differential and you didn't know what it was and you don't want to take it apart or take the cover off and count the teeth, normally it's going to be stamped on the ring gear. So you can just rotate it around and see. It's going to tell you, okay, 12 and 32 or whatever. It's going to give you the number of teeth and you just do the math after that. But if you wanted to determine an axle ratio without taking anything apart, you could do that this way. You can lift the vehicle, mark the rear tires with masking tape at 12 o'clock position, mark the drive shaft, have someone hold one tire to keep it from moving, slowly rotate the other one tire to exactly 10 times while the assistant counts the drive shaft rotation. So basically you're measuring how many drive shaft rotations for a wheel rotation. It's kind of the same with the gear, okay? Nothing you would probably ever do, but you could do it that way if you wanted to. All right, noises. Grinding or growling, usually bearing. When you're taking some of these ASE tests, they're going to describe noises. They're going to describe noises like whine, grind, click. And you're going to have to know what causes what, okay? A growling or grinding is usually a bearing, okay? Whine noise, typically, it could be a bearing, but also could be a gear noise. Your pinion depth or your ring gear spacing is off, and the gear teeth aren't meshing properly, okay? Backlash we talked about, that's done with a dial indicator, okay? Put the dial indicator on the ring gear, move it back and forth, it'll show you what the backlash is. Differential pin leaking, okay, there you go. Backlash is determined by mounting a dial indicator on the differential housing, placing the butt of the gauge against the ring gear tooth, and then you're just going to move this back and forth. Because there's going to be a little bit of play in there. The teeth don't hit tight, right? There's got to be a little bit of movement in there. Place for the lubrication to get there, because there's really no metal-to-metal contact. Okay, just like with an engine, on the bearings and stuff like that, there's no actual metal-to-metal contact. Everything rides on a film of oil, or it would just wear it out. Okay? So you mount the dial indicator on here, you put it on this ring gear tooth, zero it, and then just move that back and forth, and you'll see deflection in the needle there. It'll tell you what your backlash is. There you go. There's a giant picture of it. This is the teeth. Okay? How much space between the teeth is there? That's what the backlash is, right? It's the clearance between the drive pinion and the ring gear teeth. In this case, it's 5 to 8 thousandths. So if you measured it at 5 to 8 thousandths, would that number do you any good if you didn't know what it was supposed to be?
No.
Nope. Know what it's supposed to be before you check it. Okay? Because otherwise you don't know if it's good or bad. If the spec is 4 to 6 or 5 to 8 or whatever, you're good, right? Dial indicator again, run out. What's he doing now? Putting the dial indicator on the ring gear, mounting this to the housing somewhere, and just rotating this. All that's doing is making sure the ring gear doesn't do this while it's turning. That it doesn't have any warpage or run out, as they call it, okay? Again, if you see something like this, you may see on a test question. You may see a picture like this on an ASE test question, and it might say, what is the technician doing here? Ring gear backlash, okay? If it says, what's he doing here? Ring gear run out. Always done with a dial indicator, okay?
So that one's the run out, and then the other one's the backlash.
Backlash is going to be measured on the tooth. You're going to see this indicator here on the tooth. If it's on the back side of the ring gear where it turns, that's run out. The run out shouldn't be, or it says should be less than 2,000s. Obviously a whole lot less than the backlash, right? The backlash was like 5 to 8 in that one. Okay. So you can see a little animation of that. They're going to mount a dial indicator on there, zero the needle, and then rotate it. You're going to see deflection in the needle for how much that is out of perfectly true. Okay, this is your tooth contact pattern test. This will tell you what your ring gear spacing is and your pinion depth, as well as backlash. Any faults will be reflected in the pattern. This is normal yellow marking compound for the gear teeth. So you're going to paint a couple of gears with this marking compound. You're going to rotate it around, and based on where the teeth mesh, it's going to show you the contact pattern. And based on that pattern, you will know, is the ring gear spacing need to change? Does the pinion depth need to be changed? What's the backlash? It'll tell you all of that, okay? And you don't have to look at all this, but some of it wouldn't be a bad idea. Tooth contact patterns, you're going to see that on one of these pages in the book. Toward the end, I think. Yeah. On 1637, right? Yeah. All right. Removing a differential assembly. You move the housing cover, drain the fluid, remove the pinion shaft, push the axle in, remove the C-clips. This is if it's a C-clip, that differential. These C-clips actually hold the axles from coming out, okay? But there's a pin in between them you gotta take out, and then you gotta push the axle in, pull the clip out, pull the axle out, okay? And then it's just going to tell you how to do the rest of it and mark the side bearing caps. Some of those require a spreader to remove the carrier because the rear differential housing will flex a little bit. Pinion shaft nut, all that stuff. It's going to have two caps that hold this whole carrier in here, one here, one here. And those are where those roller bearings are that spins on. Pinion gear and associated parts. Pinion bearing replacement, that was going to have to require pulling the differential case out, the pinion out, pressing the bearing off, and then putting a new one on it. Some of them will use a collapsible spacer, as you can see on the left there. Once this nut is tightened down, this collapsible spacer will collapse a little bit, and if you happen to have to take it back apart because the pinion depth isn't right, you gotta replace that spacer again. So a one-time use thing. Okay. Ring and pinion gears are a match set. Remember I mentioned that? They're marked for correct pinion depth variance. You cannot mix ring and pinion gears, okay? If one's bad, the other's bad. You cannot buy them separately. They're always sold and replaced in a set. Your drive pinion depth can be measured in a couple of different ways by the wear pattern or a gauge to set it with, such as that. Again, something you probably never do. Pinion gear preload. Remember the pinion gear rides on tapered roller bearings, so it has to be preloaded, right? After the nut's tightened and torque needed to rotate the drive pinion should be measured with a beam type torque wrench. The drive pinion nut is tightened further until the turning torque is at the required specs. Another one you might see a picture of. They're going to ask you what's being done in this diagram. What are they doing? That's a beam tight torque wrench, right? So all this does is as you tighten whatever it is, this little needle here will deflect and move to a certain number, tell you what the torque is, right? Okay, this is your 0 mark. This is reading about somewhere around 18. This is probably an inch-pound torque wrench. This is normally what they will use. See where it says inch-pound torque wrench? Because they're not actually tightening this nut, just so you know, okay? That's not what they're doing here. They're not torquing that nut. They're actually checking the preload on this bearing to see how much torque it takes to actually rotate it. That's why it's an inch-pound torque wrench.
Why are they checking that to see how much it needs to be rotated?
What's that?
Why?
Because the pinion bearing, or the pinion drive gear, rides on tapered roller bearings.
Right.
Okay? You have to tighten this nut to a certain point until this preload is achieved.
Right, but you said that they're not tightening it, they're just seeing what the
Right.
torque rate
In
is.
this diagram, they're not tightening that nut. They're actually rotating the whole thing.
Right,
This isn't stationary. They're rotating they're rotating the pinion in the housing.
right, but you said that they're testing to see what the torque would be, right? Did you say
How
that?
much torque in inch pounds does it take to rotate that bearing, or rotate that pinion?
Yeah, but why are they doing that? Why not
Be-
just give
Because
it
that
torque?
tells you what the preload is. That tells you how tight that bearing is being compressed. Okay? Let me
missed
see if I can
something.
explain
I'm sorry,
this
I
better.
was reading and then trying to listen and I missed something. I do apologize.
Let me see what I can use here for an example.
I got it, I just,
Mm,
I missed something between me reading and listening to you. I missed something, so that's what I'm making.
okay, so let's say this was the, let's say this was the bearing here, okay? And the pinion came through and you put the nut on here, right? So you're gonna tighten this nut down to a certain torque to start with, not with this. And then, based on how much resistance is on this, as you rotate this with the inch-pound torque wrench, it's gonna tell you how tight you got that bearing. If you get it too tight, it's gonna be too much, it's gonna take too much effort to turn it. If it's not tight enough, it's gonna turn too easy. So all that's doing is getting the proper preload on that bearing so that bearing doesn't wear out. Okay? So the tighter you compress this, the harder it's gonna be to rotate. And the less, it's gonna be too easy, you have too much clearance in there. Okay, that's what they're doing. How much clamping force is on this bearing? So, again, if you see a picture like that on a test question, they are not torquing that pinion nut. They're checking the preload, bearing preload. Okay? We saw this before. Dial indicators used to measure backlash. It's put on the ring gear. Checked it at 3 or 4 points around the gear. Backlash can be corrected by moving the ring gear either closer or farther away from the pinion gear. Ring gear has to be removed from the differential case, or if the new ring gear is being installed, always replace the bolts. They will normally give you bolts if you replace a ring gear. Backlash for Morse differential is 5 to 8 thousandths. If it's too great, you can add a shim on the ring gear side. Subtract the shim thickness from the opposite side. Okay. Another dial indicator, right? End play. Gears are very, very particular about the clearance, okay? Everything on part is. The clearances on everything is critical. That's why they go into all of this stuff. If clearances aren't right, whatever it is going to fail, okay? And it may fail quickly. So, again, whether it's an engine, a differential, a transmission, these clearances have to be perfect, or it will fail. Okay, this is something that when they manufacture this differential, they put a couple of these holes here, right? What that is for a special tool that you put in here. It was actually spread this just a little bit so you could get this differential carrier out of there. Because sometimes this will flex just enough to where this is really hard to get out of there, and that will just spread it just a little bit and allow you to get it out of there. There's the tool. These are just the adjusters for side bearing preload. An adjuster tool for that. And again, these are all different types of differential setups. They go through a little bit of each one. They're not all the same.
Question.
Yeah.
So, I seen, out here where the tires are sticking out of the vehicle, like the body of the vehicle, like
Like
there.
wide body,
Huh?
wide body, like that? Is that what you're saying?
No, like, the tire, like, this is a vehicle and the tire is out here,
Yeah.
like it's sticking out. It's called what?
You can make a car wide bodied like that. You got spacers to the rotor. Are you talking about at an angle or are you talking
Dude,
about straight
I
up?
don't know. I've,
Talking about when the tires like this, like it's like.
You're talking about when it's angling like that, when it's
Okay, so look, this is the
is
car.
that negative cambered?
This is the wheel, okay?
Yeah.
Is the wheel straight up and down or is it like angling type of way?
I've seen it both. I've seen it
Okay.
straight up and then I've seen it kind of angled.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why?
There's a specific stance for some cars that some people like to put on their cars.
Because they
If you
think
take
it's
it out to
cool, but
drift,
it's
some
not.
of them need-
But, yeah.
not needed.
It's not practical.
Yeah.
It's not, cause
It's
I,
stupid.
I
Wears
asked
out your
somebody, they
bearings,
said it-
wears out your tires.
yeah.
It makes it handle like shit.
Yeah,
It's
that's
just,
what-
it's just
yeah.
stupid.
I heard that, like I asked, like, what is that? And somebody said something, and they started explaining what
Yeah.
you just said, and like, then why you
If
do
it's
it?
just for an everyday driver around car, it's dumb. But if if you're gonna drift your car on a track, you know it's gonna get beat up. Cambering the front tires would be better around corners, but there's no point to camber the rear.
Oh, so that's for like the racing and.
Yeah, on track.
I'm not
Oh,
racing. You can't race a stance car.
Not really.
oh.
Because that's just gonna spread your traction.
Yeah.
That You're just gonna slowly slide.
Yeah.
It's gonna end up forcing
Because your
something to pop
contact
up
pattern
front.
on the tire is now, instead of, let's say this is your tire, you're looking at it from the back, it's like this, right? And here's the road. So look at your contact pattern on the tire. It
Yeah.
wears out one side of the tire, plus you're not gonna get near the traction because half of the tread is off of the ground.
And what's worse about that, instead of normal tire rotations, you would have to take the entire tire off of the wheel, get it switched and flipped around, which it's not supposed to be that
Mhm.
way, put it back on there, and then rotate
Yeah.
it back to front. So people who do that are just dumb. They think it looks cool. Some
It
cars
is,
it
it's just-
slightly looks cool, but it's.
I don't know what they're thinking. They're like,
It should be mainly for like a show car.
Yeah.
Oh.
Something that you take to shows, not drive everywhere you go.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. She was talking about that, and I'm like, wait a minute, and that reminded me of the time. So how do they do that?
Yeah, that's
How-
camber. That's something.
How do they extend the axle?
no.
No.
How do they do
They
that?
make stance kits where okay, so pretty much what I know of is when you showed that you take the top bracket and the rear bracket off, or the bottom bracket they make like little other brackets that you can extend outward however far you want, and then you just bolt it like that so it goes on both sides. So it angles it, and then you gotta also lower your car a little bit or raise your car depending on the type of wheels you put on. You gotta do all this other shit, matching up the speed sensor, get it recalibrated, do all the other shit.
So obviously
because
you
it's
can't
extra.
bend an axle. What they're doing is they're just changing the angle of the suspension.
Exactly.
Oh.
Exactly.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
So they're screwing up the alignments, what they're doing.
Pretty much.
They're extreming the camber alignment is what they're doing.
Okay, so my question into that is, so when they do that, that affects the different, like that messes up, like does that, what kind of effect does that cause on the differential?
They don't have differentials on those cars.
Oh, they
They're
don't?
front-wheel drive. They work off of axle shafts and CV joints that have the ability to have the angle change. But it just changes the angle of the suspension where the wheel hub bolts on, okay? And it's basically just an extreme alignment adjustment, is all it is.
Are you
Because
saying-
caster, camber, toe in, toe out are all alignment specifications. They're just taking the negative camber and they're extreming it.
Yeah.
That's really all they're doing.
Okay.
So you said cars that do that don't have the rear differential? Or
Yeah,
don't have the rear
you
differential?
can't, because those have straight axles.
Yeah.
You can't do that with those. There's no way to do it.
Unless somebody changed the whole chassis of a Hellcat, somebody has a Hellcat that stance like crazy and it looks dumb.
Okay, well, those are still driven by
Yeah.
half shaft type axles with CV joints. They're not straight axles like a
Okay.
normal differential car would be.
Got you.
Yeah. Because they don't even really use those anymore except on like trucks and stuff now.
Yeah.
Even rear wheel drive cars now, they don't have those straight axles anymore.
Yeah.
Okay? Like his Camaro has got those, it's got CV joint type axles, even in the back. Okay, bearing preload, we've talked about bearing preload. This is again, just shimming for clearances. We don't care about that. Rear differential assembly, backlash check. Saw C-clips. Saw axle shaft if you had to take it apart, make sure you get the right lubricant in it. Limited slip additive that prevents those clutches from chattering. This guy installed the rear differential cover the wrong way. I don't know how you could do that, but he did it. Okay.
Both sides look the same.
What's that?
When you installed it, don't they look like the same? when you switch it
Okay, so I'll show you what he did wrong. Let me find a picture of okay, let's use this. Okay, so let's say here's your rear differential, right? There's a cover that goes on here, right? Well, the cover has a hump right here to allow clearance for the ring gear. Well, this guy put it on backwards. How could you be that stupid? I mean, really?
When it won't.
So look at the picture. You can see he put it on backwards.
Wouldn't it line up?
And yeah, see where the ring gear was scraping on it?
But how?
But the
how-
bolt holes actually lined up because they're symmetrical, where you could turn it on backwards or actually bolt up.
But even if the bolt holes do line up, once you connect it,
Wouldn't you know it was hitting, I mean, come on.
yeah, like I don't understand.
You see this part right here? This is the hump to allow the ring gear. How could you put that on backwards? It's so obvious.
When you hear it,
I'm sorry,
like you sound scrape right there, what do you hear? Like when you hear it?
I would hear it.
Why would you hear?
what
it
would you
driving?
hear?
Yeah, like what you
Wouldn't
hear?
you hear that?
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
Like as soon as you
Yeah.
start moving, you just hear something that's
Yeah.
tracking.
Oh, you wouldn't be able to move it out of the stall before it started going tearing the cover up, right?
Okay, I got another question.
Yeah,
So like, if it just wears, would you hear that too?
I'm sorry, what?
If it goes bad?
What? If what goes bad?
Yeah, the diff. If the diff goes bad, would you be able to hear it too? Be it goes bad?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's gonna whine, or it's gonna growl, or something like that, grind. Again, a growl or a grind can be like a bearing. A whine would be your gear spacing, improper. Sometimes you're gonna whine on acceleration, sometimes it'll be a deceleration, sometimes both. So a whine is more associated with a gear. A grind or a growl more likely with a bearing. Although a bearing can sometimes cause a whine noise, but. All right. Let's go ahead and have you do this, and then we'll, once we get back from lunch, we'll go through it together, but just go ahead and do it now. I think this picture didn't come out very well, but hopefully you can make it out. It was one of those that we spent a lot of time on up here, so you should be familiar with this picture. done, we can go ahead and take off for lunch time, see you back at 12:30, and we'll go through this.